Welcome to My Psychedelic Roots, a podcast of conversations with people from a broad swath of lived experience to explore their psychedelic beginnings or roots, what led them to start using psychedelics, what those early experiences were like, and how those roots have impacted their life's unfolding. My name is Amy Bartlett. It is my hope that these stories, generously shared by my guests, offer perspective and insight into the lived reality of psychedelic experiencing. So whoever, wherever, or whenever you are, welcome. I'm glad that you're here. In this episode, I get to sit down with my friend and colleague, Raymond Feng. Raymond is a breakdancer, writer, appreciator of life, and self-described lifelong learner. He discovered his passion for psychonautics through psychedelic medicine and spirituality, and has brought that passion into his life in a variety of ways. Academically, he has finished 2 bachelor degrees at University of Ottawa, one in Biomedical Sciences and the other in psychology. And recently, he completed a master's in mental health counselling and behavioral medicine at Boston University School of Medicine. In my experience of Raymond, he is a very thoughtful, open, gentle, and generous person, and someone who is able to find balance between presence and joy in ways that I really admire. Our chat wends its way through his childhood context and into his first psychedelic experience, which challenged him to trust his connection to self and others in some life-changing ways. It was a pleasure to hear his story and to explore his experience together. And so, let's hear more about Raymond's psychedelic roots. Hello, Raymond.
Hello.
Have you here?
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good. So we learned a bit about you in the introduction. So I'd love to jump in to hear a little bit about who Raymond was before psychedelics. Thinking back to your younger self, how would you describe your way of seeing the world, and what was your childhood like?
I grew up in an atheist family. Religion wasn't present at all. Yeah, I actually didn't know anything about religion. Growing up and knowing my parents more now, I realized that they're both very spiritual people. They believe in higher power for sure. However, yeah, as a kid, we never really talked about it. So I always had this perception that what I could see and touch and feel, that was what was real and just that.
And what did you enjoy doing as a kid or moving through the world?
In terms of hobbies,
Just in terms of, when we think about making a connection between our childhood and the things we experienced there, and making that connection to our psychedelic experiences and that desire to know ourselves better, there's sometimes insight or connections that we can make between what we experienced, what we prioritized, what we loved, what caused us pain in
mm,
childhood, and how that may or may not have impacted our eventual move towards psychedelic experiencing. So, in that sense, if there were a thread from your childhood to your first psychedelic experience, where might that thread begin?
hmm, that's a good question. It probably would have started around when I was like 17. I had a pretty rough childhood growing up, and so I don't think I had a very solid foundational friend group until I was in 7th grade. And
So
so,
you
yeah,
felt lonely as a child?
yeah, absolutely. I don't think I learned empathy until I was around, yeah, in 7th grade.
What happened in 7th grade to shift things for you?
I have this memory of seeing one of those very classic school posters, and it said, treat people the way you want to be treated. And I remember just having this really big realization. I was like, wow, I don't think I was ever taught how to be kind and how to be integrated into like social situations very well. I knew how to be polite, but only because people tell you this is how you should be. But I never really understood it from a core level. And so I think starting grade seven and seeing that poster, that really gave me another perspective change. And so maybe the thread actually started there now that I think about it. That feeling of connectedness and being integrated in with the other.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so your childhood, it sounds like you felt kind of apart or separated from others?
Yeah, I would say so. I don't think I fully felt like truly connected until maybe when I moved for university when I was 18. Yeah. I was born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta, and
Mhm.
then moved to Ottawa for my first year of college.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so what changed for you when you got to college? How did you connect with others, and how did you experience that new connection?
I think a huge part of it was welcome week. During that week, there was a lot of activities, and it was a way for freshmen to get to know each other and make friend groups. I don't think I was living authentically until that point. I always considered myself an introvert, and I really identified with that feeling. However, I realized later on that it was simply shyness and social anxiety. And
Mm.
so moving to Ottawa and being in a different environment gave me the opportunity to recreate my identity and have myself be the person that I want to be.
How interesting, these milestones in grade 7, seeing the other, and then moving and starting university, sort of starting to see yourself as you want to be seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an interesting progression.
Yeah. Both of them were changes in environments, which led to those changes in identity.
What was the change in environment in grade 7?
Junior high starts in Alberta in grade seven. I also made the decision to go into late French immersion starting grade seven. And so when I entered the new school, most of the people in my class I did not know. And so, yeah, different friend group, different school, different language.
That is a theme, you know, up until grade 7, and then going to high school or to university, excuse me. What do you think was keeping you stuck? Or what do you think needed to change or wanted to change when you got these
Hmm.
opportunities to refresh or reimagine your relationship to self or others?
I think there was a part of me that maybe perhaps always knew that I wanted to be more expressive, more higher energy, more extroverted. However, I guess I just didn't know, or maybe that part of myself wasn't accepted. Perhaps it was being raised in environments where that part of myself was like pushed down. However, I always did feel more relaxed in a spiritual way, not necessarily like physically, but it just felt like things flowed a lot better when I was that way. And so in junior high, I was slowly accepting that part of myself more and letting that part of myself show more. And
Mhm.
that led into high school and then to college.
Yeah, that's really cool. So by college, you were feeling better able to be yourself, express yourself, know yourself, be curious about yourself in different ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I think high school, I wanted to be that person. I wanted to be the person who isn't afraid to be the center of attention. And I think breakdancing allowed me to explore that a lot more. So I started that in high school in grade 10. There
Mhm.
was a club at our school, but I was always way too shy to participate in battles, to dance in crowds in front of people. But I always like practice at home in secrecy. And then in grade 12, I mustered enough confidence with dance to perform at the very year end dance circle in grade 12. And that was a moment where I realized that you just got to put yourself out there. And so when I went off to college during that welcome week, I really pushed myself to talk to every single person and meet every single person. And yeah, it was a really big transformation.
How did
Yeah.
it feel to be so much more extroverted and, putting yourself out there with all these new people in this new environment?
It felt congruent to like
Mm,
who I am. It Yeah, it felt very freeing and
mhm,
very like meant to be.
mm.
Yeah, I'm definitely a people person, a community based person, and so I'm very proud of myself and glad that I did that.
Yeah. And so I expect that that move to university eventually transformed into your first psychedelic experience. And I'm curious, was there a particular moment or conversation or experience that started to pique your interest or that made you consider trying psychedelics for the first time?
Yeah, so actually, my first psychedelic experience was in grade 12, and
Oh,
that
wait, I was wrong.
was
I'm sorry.
surprise. No,
Okay.
that's okay. And yeah, that was the catalyst for me moving to university. I wasn't planning to at all. I was just planning to stay home in Edmonton, go to University of Alberta, and just stay there. But I think part of me always just thought like, what if, what if? And knowing that in grade 7 when I moved schools, it led to growth and led to more self-acceptance.
Mhm,
Part of me always wanted to redo that and like move somewhere new.
mhm,
And yeah, I had my first psychedelic experience. I think it was March or April around that time of grade 12.
mm.
And yeah, it was quite an experience. And that led me eventually to make the decision to move out of home and go somewhere new.
So tell me, how did you first learn about psychedelics or even know that they existed? How did those around you react to your curiosity, or how did you learn about them? Did you grow up in an environment where psychedelics were discussed positively or negatively?
I wouldn't say I knew psychedelics in terms of like scientifically.
Mhm,
I've definitely heard of like magic mushrooms before, like acid. And to me, it just all sounded, they all fit inside this umbrella of like hard drugs, even though that they're not. And I think media really portrayed them to have a certain stigma. And
mhm,
so I always thought of them as very just dangerous, like a step up from drugs that are more commonly accepted in society, such as alcohol and marijuana or
mhm.
cannabis. And so, yeah, I didn't really know much about them at all, but I was curious.
Did you ever talk
Yeah,
about drugs in your family or with your parents or with your friends?
definitely not at home. My parents grew up in China and then moved to Canada, I think 2 years before I was born. So they moved to Canada in 1996. And yeah, they're very traditional.
Mm,
And drugs are a very big taboo in China. And so, no, it was never discussed. In terms of my friend group, I would say the friend group I'm in and like was back then too, everyone was more open minded about substances. My friends like to party a lot, and I'm a very social person. And so I was very interested in that scene as well. But I don't think any of us understood what psychedelics were and how they were different from other substances.
right. And so, did you know other people who had used psychedelics before you used them for the first time?
Not a lot. A really good friend of mine, he took it, I think it was like 2 days before my first trip. So I think it was his idea first. He's a very adventurous person. And I remember at lunch one day, he just approached me and he was like, hey, so at that point, we've tried cannabis. And he was like, hey, like, I've heard of like magic mushrooms before. I know someone who could like give us some. Would you like to try it? And I remember like thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, like, is it safe? Such and such. And I remember doing very minimal research online, which was very naive of me. So that was a very big lesson. Yeah, I don't know. Imagine to put anything in my body without knowing what it is. But I knew it was a soft drug and that I couldn't overdose on it physically. And so I was like, all right, should be okay. There was one classmate who he was like one of the popular kids, one of the jocks, and he was boasting about how he's done it before. And turns out he hadn't at that time. And he was saying that, oh, yeah, you could shoot fireballs out of your hands, you'll see dragons and such. And so it was a perception that was very relative to how media, like movie, would portray psychedelics at times, which isn't really accurate from my experience. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say I knew a lot of people who have done
Yeah.
psychedelics.
It sounds like you kind of went in a little bit blind in terms of what to expect or anticipate.
Yeah, absolutely. And also a bit malinformed.
And so, what was the set and setting like for that first experience? Were you alone? Were you with friends? How were you feeling? Were you nervous? Were you confident?
I was definitely nervous.
Mhm.
It's that feeling of the unknown and taking something and just knowing that there's no going back. It's almost like getting strapped into a roller coaster and then there's no turning back. I was with 3 of my friends. One of them had previous psychedelic experience, and he's also he reads a lot of books, and so he was like the trip sitter and the guru, and so he was explaining all these concepts to us about, like, ego death and such after the trip.
Not
Um
before.
Yeah, no. And 2 other friends, one friend, he was just sober, he, like, looked after us, and so it was me and my, another guy, and, yeah, we bought some Little Caesars pizza, and then we put the mushrooms on the pizza, and we just ate that.
Hmm,
Yeah. We took about 2 grams each.
okay. And so how was the come up for you?
There was a lot of nausea. Yeah, I wasn't comfortable. Yeah, at one point, I knew that my friend who was hosting, so he has a guest room at his place, and I felt very antisocial, and so I was like, "Hey, can I go to your guest room?" And he was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So most of the trip, I actually did it alone in a room by myself.
I'm thinking about your childhood and how lonely that was. There's something kind of poetic about that, or did that play
Mm.
into that choice that you made, I wonder?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I've never really thought about it like that, but I think so too. Perhaps growing up lonely and having the lack of self-acceptance, perhaps in that moment, I wanted to be alone because there was the fear of being vulnerable with my
Mhm.
friends.
I wonder. And so the mushrooms started to have an effect, you were feeling kind of nauseous, you decided you wanted to go and be alone and be in this other room. And so how did that first experience unfold for you?
It was definitely not like what I imagined it to be. I remember being in the bed and it was a very slow, gradual come up. And I remember my body feeling very wet. And I was almost like scared that I've accidentally relieved myself at times. And through hindsight, when I like was talking to my friends about it, turns out it's because your skin gets very hypersensitive. So you feel wet. But I remember being uncomfortable. I was just like on the bed trying to like readjust how I was my positioning and such. And then eventually I I wore these thick framed glasses at the time, and my glasses had black frames.
Mhm.
And I remember looking up and having my eyeballs just like pointing up, looking at the ceiling, and
Mhm.
the frame of my glasses, that black part, slowly engulfed my peripheral vision. And then suddenly my just like central vision too. And then I was just in space. I was like in this vacuum. And I remember at that moment, I really want to listen to music, but I didn't know what to listen to. So I searched online and it says that you should listen to like jungle sounds and nature sounds. And so searched on YouTube, listened to that, and immediately as soon as the sounds came on, it transported me into like this jungle. And I don't know if you've seen The Incredibles,
Mhm.
the like Pixar movie from Disney. And suddenly I was like in the jungle of that movie. And it was almost like identical. It was very interesting. At that point in my life, I've never felt a change in consciousness and perspective like that before. And so everything like that was when I realized that not everything you see, and not everything you like feel and touch and smell is reality. And I was like, wow, there could be like multiple realities, like one outside and one in your mind. Yeah. And slowly after that, I reached the peak and I was experiencing ego dissolution. And I remember at one point I was talking to this individual in just like pure vacuum. And the figure was telling me, "Oh, hey, Raymond, I know that you want to stay back home for university. However, if you push yourself and challenge yourself to go somewhere where you're uncomfortable, you will grow. And this is an opportunity for you to be the person you want to be. And 5 years from now, you're going to look back and you're going to thank yourself for it." And I remember just like talking to this figure. I'm like, wow, you know what? Like, you're absolutely right. And after thinking about it later on, I realized that that figure I was talking to was my inner demons personified as a person. And it was almost like my shadow. And I got the acceptance letter to University of Ottawa a couple days later. So I only applied because my mom told me to, but I was very certain I wasn't going to move across the country to go there for college. And I had the trip and I got the acceptance letter a couple days later. And at that point, I was very certain that I want to move out. And
Mhm.
yeah, that was my first psychedelic experience.
Wow. What's a big life message contained in this experience of other states, other worlds? Did you feel scared at all during the trip?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
I was, yeah, I was, but I was also very intrigued. And so I pushed myself to keep venturing, to like keep swimming into the deep end of the pool.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. And so you had this encounter with this person who encouraged you to push yourself and to go challenge yourself, be in a different place, go to university somewhere new. And that was part of the peak. How was it to come back to Earth? How did it feel being alone in that room? When did you reconnect with your friends, or did you?
Yeah. I remember having the peak and then having this moment of realization that, wait a minute, like, am I dreaming? Is this actually part of the trip? Am I still where I think I am? And I remember having this dissociated out of body experience. And it almost felt like clairvoyance in a way. I could feel energy on the other side of the wall where my friends
Mhm.
were. I don't know if it was placebo or just maybe hallucination or it was real. And I was like, oh my God, I need to talk to my friends about this. I need to reconvene. And so I like hopped back in my body and then opened the door and there was like tears running down my eyes and it was just like such an emotional moment. And I saw my friends and I was like, guys, this is crazy. And then the friend who took mushrooms with me that day was like, oh my God, Raven, this is crazy. And then we just like embraced each other and we were like, there's so much emotions. And it was really beautiful. And it was so vulnerable. And yeah, all four of us just briefed and talked about the experience. And I remember on the way home that day, I stopped by a gas station to like pick some snacks up. And I remember looking at the sunset, and it felt like I came back from the airport after a very long trip, a very long vacation. And it was that feeling of novelty in a place of familiarity. And so it was experiencing my home in a different perspective, and that was the first time I've had that, and it was so interesting, and that's when I realized that that's maybe perhaps why they call it a trip. You really do go somewhere and then come back.
Mm. How would you describe where you went?
The trip itself, I think if it felt like I was going up,
Mhm.
it felt like I was like they say like higher consciousness, and it almost like really does feel that way. I was becoming more aware of just awareness itself and also my body and the environment and just what reality is constructed out of. But I also felt like directionally I was going upwards. However, now when I look back on it, it feels like I was like going inwards and I was like diving deeper into my psyche. Yeah.
Yeah, that's well said. It's always an interesting thing to explore and understand, how much of what we experience in these psychedelic states is about what is outside of us and how much of it is about what is inside it rather than outside.
Yeah.
So that's well said and well put.
Thank you.
What do you think is the most important lesson that you learned from that first experience? Not just in the medicine, but the experience as a whole.
Hmm. I think, and yeah, it's one of the mottos I live by now. Most of the regrets you're going to have in life aren't the things you did do, but the things you did not do. And so during that trip, I had the realization that if I was to push myself and move to Ottawa for university, I would grow and I would have new experiences. And yeah, worst comes to worst. s- Yeah, like even with other experiences now in life, I try my best not to say no. And I tell myself, worst comes to worst, it makes a good story to tell. And yeah, you never really know. But in order to grow, you have to feel uncomfortability.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Sounds like you really trust yourself to take care of yourself as you jump into these different scenarios, whether in ordinary or non-ordinary states of consciousness. I really admire that trust.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's something I love in myself.
Mm.
Yeah, took a lot of years of experiencing different things and exercising that trust and building that trust with myself. Yeah, that means a lot to hear you say that. So thank you, Amy.
You're welcome. What is one thing you wish you had known before that first psychedelic experience? Or maybe there were several things, I'm not sure.
Honestly, it would have been nice to do my own research. I had this very wise professor at University of Ottawa for Drugs 101, Dr. Ogilvy, and one of the first things he said in class was dosage makes the poison or the medicine.
Mhm.
And he was talking about like Botox, for example, which is, if I remember correctly, one of the most poisonous or toxic things like in the world. But even in the small, minute amounts, it can be used as medicine. for like cosmetics or like sphincter disorders, such and such. And so I'm very grateful that my first psychedelic experience wasn't too overwhelming. But later on in the future, I definitely had experiences where I did not treat the substance with as much respect as I should have. And that led to a lot of consequences and negative experiences, which definitely came with its own set of lessons. However, yeah, it was definitely naive of me to take this substance without knowing what it was like. And I'm grateful it went well, but in some other universe, it may not have.
And so, what is your relationship with psychedelics today?
I definitely appreciate them very much. I like to have at least one solo trip every year just to do some self reflection and gain another perspective on how things are going in my life. Yeah, I see them as tools to live a happier life, a more fulfilling life, and to better grow and understand myself.
That's beautiful. And so, if you could leave a person thinking about psychedelics or doing that exploration, what's one piece of advice you would give to someone who is thinking about going down this path?
Hmm. If there's even a slight feeling of curiosity, which can sometimes come in the shape of anxiety, push yourself to go explore that. Definitely don't over push, because sometimes you could just over push yourself and it's like pushing yourself into a swimming pool and to like try to teach yourself how to swim. So I think having support and someone trusted around you is very important, but also trusting yourself. And so, yeah, don't be afraid to explore and wander a bit, whether that's like the initial decision to take psychedelics or it's if it's during the trip and you're doing some introspection. Yeah, definitely do your research. Don't take too much. It's always better to take not enough than too much. Yeah, eat, drink water, self-care before the trip and like after the trip, have snacks in between. Yeah, knowledge is power, so do your research
Hmm.
before jumping in.
I love that, Raymond. I love how honoring your curiosity and also honoring yourself and your boundaries. And part of being self compassionate is being gentle
Hmm.
with your curiosity. And yeah, that's what I heard in what you shared. And I love that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a very insightful observation. I appreciate how you worded that.
Oh, I'm just reflecting back what
Uh,
I heard you say. So,
Yeah, self care is very important. I think it's one of the hardest things that an individual can do, but it's very important.
yeah. Raymond, thank you so much for sharing your psychedelic roots with us. It was a real pleasure to hear about your experiences and, yeah, a lot of insight for a lot of folks and lots of resonances for me as well. I really appreciate hearing about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on this podcast. I appreciate you inviting me to talk, and I hope whoever is listening to this has a good trip. Yeah, yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you, Raymond.